And new this morning, Honda Canada is putting its $15 billion Canadian electric vehicle plans on hold for 2 years.
Alliston, Ontario, automaker Honda, along with the Prime Minister and Ontario's Premier, have just announced a $15 billion investment.
Honda has announced a $15 billion investment in Ontario, building EV batteries in vehicles north of the GTA in Alliston.
The storm didn't begin with a press release, a factory shutdown, or a corporate emergency meeting. It began with a podium, a microphone, and a familiar voice promising to punish the cheaters and bring manufacturing home. Donald Trump's return to the White House came with a political thunderclap. New tariffs aimed squarely at foreign automakers. Among them, none felt the shock more violently than Honda, a company that once stood as one of America's most trusted automotive partners. For decades, Honda symbolized something deeply American: cars built in U.S. plants, by U.S. workers, driving along U.S. highways. In fact, Honda's factories were among the earliest foreign investments to take root in the Midwest, turning quiet towns into thriving manufacturing hubs. The Civic, the Accord, the CR-V, these weren't just Japanese exports. They were woven into America's economic DNA. But today, that legacy is collapsing under the weight of a new economic reality. Tariffs meant to protect American jobs have instead triggered the opposite effect: a mass corporate retreat that's rewriting the map of North America's auto industry. And at the center of that fallout is Honda, a company suddenly staring at a future it didn't choose. When Trump raised tariffs on imported parts, batteries, and EV components, the numbers were brutal. Honda relies heavily on specialized EV parts produced in Japan and Southeast Asia. Under the new policy, many of those parts now carry tariffs ranging from 25% to nearly 50%. For an automaker transitioning aggressively into electric vehicles, those added costs aren't just inconvenient, they're catastrophic. Inside Honda's North American leadership rooms, the conversation shifted from innovation to survival. Production lines slowed, investment plans froze. Executives who once talked confidently about the U.S. EV boom now spoke in cautious, measured tones. And then came the moment the industry feared most. Honda announced that several EV programs planned for the U.S. market would be suspended or relocated entirely. The headlines called it a collapse. Economists called it predictable. But for thousands of American workers, it felt like betrayal, one caused not by foreign competition, but by their own government's policies. Meanwhile, just across the northern border, a very different story was unfolding. Canada, stable, predictable, and home to strong trade agreements, offered Honda something the U.S. no longer could: certainty. With access to clean energy, rare minerals, EV battery incentives, and tariff-free imports under CPTPP, Canada suddenly looked less like a secondary market and more like the future headquarters of Japan's EV ambitions. As Trump's tariffs rattled the American landscape, Canada quietly opened its doors. And Honda, faced with a brutal financial equation, made the choice that would reshape North America's EV future. What began as a political show of strength is now accelerating a shift no one can ignore. Honda isn't fleeing out of fear, it's moving out of necessity. And where the U.S. is building walls, Canada is building the next great EV empire. Honda's collapse inside the U.S. wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, widening fracture. The first cracks appeared in the supply chain. EV batteries, electric motors, rare earth components, sensors, the technological backbone of Honda's EV transition, were suddenly trapped behind tariff walls thick enough to choke any long-term planning. For every car Honda wanted to build in America, the cost ballooned by thousands of dollars before a single bolt was tightened. Internally, Honda's analysts ran the numbers again and again, hoping for a different outcome. But math has no loyalty. Every calculation pointed in the same direction. The U.S. had become the most expensive place in North America to build an electric vehicle. When parts that once crossed borders freely suddenly carried 25%, 35%, even 50% tariffs, the economics flipped overnight. A battery pack sourced from Japan became nearly unaffordable. A drive unit imported from Thailand doubled in price. Even raw materials like lithium and cobalt faced cost spikes due to American import penalties. For an automaker already navigating the fragile economics of EV production, the system simply broke. Honda had two choices: bleed money in the US or move. And that's when Canada emerged not just as an alternative, but as the solution. Under the CPTPP and Canada-Japan trade agreements, Honda could import advanced EV components tariff-free. That single advantage rewrote the entire financial model. But Canada offered much more than tax relief. It offered structure, a full ecosystem designed for the future of electric mobility. Ontario in particular became Honda's new gravitational center. Cities like Alliston, Windsor, and Cambridge, already home to automotive talent, saw new life as Honda expanded EV research hubs, battery engineering teams, and supply chain facilities. The Canadian government fast-tracked subsidies, clean energy incentives, and mining partnerships for Japanese manufacturers. Even rare minerals like nickel, cobalt, and lithium, essential for EV batteries, could be sourced directly from Canada's own mining regions, creating a seamless domestic loop from raw material to finished vehicle. Meanwhile, in the US, factories slowed to their quietest pace in decades. Workers who once built Civics and CR-Vs watched entire EV programs disappear from production schedules. Honda's celebrated EV collaboration with GM, once hailed as the dawn of America's electric revolution, was quietly dismantled. The future that was supposed to energize America's auto industry was now powering Canada instead. Economists began calling it the Great Northward Shift, a movement not driven by nationalism or politics, but by cold financial logic. Honda wasn't alone. Analysts warned that if the tariff environment didn't stabilize, more automakers would follow the same path. Canada wasn't stealing the future. The US was pushing it away. In just 1 year, Canada transformed from a secondary player into the most strategic EV hub in North America. And Honda, once the pride of American manufacturing towns, became the company proving a harsh new truth. In the EV era, the winners are not the loudest nations, but the ones that offer stability. History has a way of repeating itself when nations ignore its lessons. More than 40 years ago, the United States tried to protect its auto industry by locking Japanese manufacturers out with steep restrictions and voluntary export limits. Back then, the strategy looked tough, patriotic, and politically powerful, but the result was the exact opposite of what Washington expected. Instead of shrinking, Japan adapted, and it chose Canada as its new foothold into North America. Ontario became home to massive Honda and Toyota plants, quietly bypassing US trade walls and reshaping the continent's auto landscape. Today, under Trump's new tariff wave, that same story is unfolding again, only larger, faster, and tied to the future of an entire technological era. The difference now is that the stakes are no longer just sedans and SUVs. This time, the battleground is electric vehicles, the machines that will define the energy future of every nation for the next century. And in this era, production isn't just about assembly lines. It's about controlling battery metals, research clusters, clean energy infrastructure, and software ecosystems. By raising tariffs to historic levels, the US hasn't built a wall. It has opened a door, and Canada has stepped through it with remarkable timing. Unlike the US, Canada entered long-term partnerships early. It secured rare mineral access. It funded battery factories. It offered Japanese companies a trade environment free from volatility. Honda's move was not a retreat from America. It was an alignment with a system built for stability. And the moment Honda shifted north, the momentum pulled other industries with it: battery suppliers, logistics operators, chip designers, and energy investors. The American EV dream, once on the verge of leading the world, began to fracture. The closure of Honda's US-based EV plants sent shockwaves across the Midwest. Towns once promised thousands of new electric jobs found themselves staring at empty promises and silent factory floors. Local leaders demanded answers. Industry analysts warned that the EV race was slipping away. But companies don't run on passion or politics. They run on predictability. And the predictability was no longer in the US. Canada, meanwhile, is experiencing a manufacturing renaissance unlike anything in its modern history. New supply chains are forming. New mines are opening. Battery research centers in Toronto and British Columbia are partnering with Japanese engineers to shape next-generation EV technology. The same pattern that once revived Canada in the 1980s is happening again. But this time, it's not about combustion engines. It's about the future of global energy. America tried to protect its industry with force. Canada protected itself with consistency. And as the global EV revolution accelerates, the nations that rise will be the ones that keep their doors open, their policies steady, and their alliances strong. Honda's decision may have been quiet, but its message was thunderous. The future doesn't belong to the biggest market. It belongs to the most stable one. In that quiet battle for the next century of mobility, Canada has already taken the lead.